before the earth knew the shape of justice, or the laws of men were written on stone, the gods ruled with the terrifying caprice of storms. We look back at the ancient myths and see mirrors of our own fragility, but few stories reflect that terrifying fragility quite like the tale of Jupiter's wrath and the drowning of the world. It is a story of fire, water, and the thin, trembling line between destruction and survival, a reminder that civilization is but a raft floating on a chaotic sea. To understand the deluge, we must first look upon the world of the bronze, the age descended from the long-lost Golden Age. In the time of Ovid's telling, this was the era of Jupiter, the king of the Olympians, who ruled the skies with a thunderbolt in one hand and the scales of judgment in the other. But this was an age of decay. The line between the divine and the human had blurred, and in the shadows of the sacred mountains, a terrible sickness had taken root in the blood of mortals. The giants, children of the earth, had begun to cast their ambitious eyes upward, plotting to storm the very gates of heaven. Worse still were the rumors that reached Jupiter's era, whispers of a race of mortals who had grown wicked, arrogant, and disdainful of the gods. The piety that once anchored the cosmos was rotting, replaced by a violence that stained the earth. Jupiter, sitting upon his icy throne, looked down and saw not the creation of his father Saturn, but a festering wound that required cauterization. The king of the gods called a council. It was not a debate, but a decree. The air itself grew heavy as the gods gathered, and Jupiter, his voice rolling like the thunder he commanded, announced that the impure race of man must be blotted out. He considered fire, the purifying flame, but held back. The heavens were his realm, and he feared that the sacred fire might scorch the very stars and set the golden ether ablaze. So he turned his eyes to the other element, the weapon of his brother Neptune. He chose the water. Suddenly, the winds were unleashed, not the gentle breezes that ripple the grain, but the tearing gales of a hurricane. The dark clouds, woven thick as iron, were drawn down from the corners of the heavens to blot out the sun. Iris, the messenger of the rainbow, was stripped of her colorful robes, sent down to fetch water for the coming deluge. The rivers burst their banks, their currents reversing as if frightened of the sea. Neptune, the shaker of the earth, rose from the deeps. He struck the trident against the trembling soil, and the land quaked, opening fissures for the underground rivers to gush forth. The world became a blur of rain and foam, a gray chaos where the sky and the sea were indistinguishable. In this torrent, the works of humanity were swept away like toys. The vineyards that gave wine to the altars were torn asunder. The tall cypresses, once proud, snapped like dry twigs. The boar lost its speed in the mud, and the eagle, king of the air, found its wings too heavy to beat against the wall of rain. Beasts and men alike scrambled toward the high hills, crawling over jagged rocks, only to watch the water rise with a relentless, hungering pace. The valleys became lakes, the lakes became inland seas, and finally, the hills themselves were swallowed, leaving nothing but a universal, heaving ocean where silence reigned, save for the hiss of the rain and the groan of the dying winds. Yet, in the shadow of Mount Parnassus, there survived a remnant. Deucalion, the son of the crafty Prometheus, and his wife Pyrrha, daughter of the Titaness Pandora, were the sole mortals found worthy of the Ark of Salvation. They were not giants, nor were they kings of wicked cities. They were pious, humble, and devoted to the laws of the gods. Seeing their virtue, Jupiter had stayed his hand just enough to let them live. They had floated upon the dark waters in a small boat, a fragile eggshell bobbing on the wrath of the king, until the vessel finally grounded on the damp peak of the mountain. When they stepped onto the mud, the world was empty. A crushing loneliness gripped their hearts, a silence so profound it felt louder than the storm that had just ceased. They fell to the earth, weeping before an empty shrine, praying to the Titaness Themis for guidance, for they were afraid they were the last souls alive in the universe. The goddess, though the Titans had fallen, heard their prayer. Her voice echoed from the cavern, a command that seemed strange to their desperate ears. "Depart from my temple," she intoned. "Cover your heads, and throw the bones of your great mother behind you." Pyrrha was struck cold with terror. To cast the bones of their mother? It seemed a sacrilege, a desecration of the dead. But Deucalion, possessing the keen wit of his father Prometheus, divined the riddle. He soothed his wife, explaining that the great mother was not a corpse, but the earth herself, and her bones were the stones that lay scattered upon the ground. To survive, they had to trust in the earth that had birthed them. Shaking but resolute, they veiled their faces against the judgment of the gods. They walked, stooped low, and cast stones over their shoulders. The miracle began. As the stones hit the mud, they lost their hardness. They softened, expanded, and took on form. The stones thrown by Deucalion hardened into the shape of men, strong and resilient. The stones cast by Pyrrha transformed into women, recreating the race of humanity. It was a hard birth, fitting for the Bronze Aegea, a people born of rock, destined to endure hardship and labor. As the waters receded, leaving a scarred but cleansed world, life began to creep back from the corners. The sun, long hidden, pierced through the dispersing clouds, warming the wet earth. From the rotting leaves of the flood, new creatures were born, but they were different now, serpents, beasts, and insects, the new children of a waterlogged world. The age of innocence was truly gone, replaced by an age of toil, where the earth would yield its bounty only to the sweat of the brow. The meaning of this flood was not merely destruction, but the terrifying power of pietas, duty, and respect. To the Romans, Jupiter was not just a weather god, but the very embodiment of social order and the state. The flood was the ultimate veto of the Senate of the skies. It taught that civilization is a privilege, not a right, and that hubris arrogance against the divine order invites annihilation. Yet, it also encoded a profound hope. The world is resilient. From the hardest substances, the stones of the earth, life can be reborn. It is a story that validates the authority of the gods, while acknowledging the grit required of humanity to survive in their shadow. This tale, woven into the fabric of Ovid's metamorphoses, washed into the consciousness of the Western world. It stands as the grandfather of the flood narratives that permeate human history, echoing the story of Noah in the Hebrew Bible, of Utnapishtim in the Epic of Gilgamesh, and of Manu in the Hindu traditions. It lives in our language in the phrase, a deluge, and in the way we conceptualize the end of days. Artists through the centuries, from the mosaics of Pompeii to the canvases of the Renaissance, have captured Deucalion and Pyrrha casting the stones, fascinated by that moment where raw earth becomes living flesh. We look at the sky today, and we rarely fear that it will fall. We have built our citadels of steel and glass, and we often forget the ancient pact between the heavens and the earth. But when the rivers swell and the storms rage, when the rain falls with a violence that stops the hum of the city, we feel a tremor of that ancient fear. We remember, deep in our blood, that we are creatures of the mud and the rock, clinging to the surface of a world that can, at the whim of forces greater than ourselves,